What if everything you knew about shelter was wrong, and the key to survival was hiding in plain sight? What if the very earth could save you when everything else failed? It's a question nobody in the Colorado mountains of 1,881 thought to ask. March 1,881. For 12 days, the storm had raged. The town of Ridgerist, Colorado, was gone. The buildings were still there, the streets, the church steeple, but you couldn't see any of it. Snow fell without pause, driven by winds that screamed down from the peaks like the voices of angry gods. Drifts climbed past windows, past rooftops, past chimneys. The entire valley floor lay beneath 7.5 meters of white silence. Trapped in their buried homes, people were running out of air. They were running out of food. They were running out of hope. But high on the southern cliff face, above the valley, Isaiah and Martha Redmond sat by their window. Their home was carved into the living rock itself. They watched the storm spend its fury against stone that had stood for 1,000 centuries. The cliff overhang above their home deflected the snow. The mass of the cliff absorbed the cold. Even in the middle of the blizzard, their south-facing windows caught whatever pale light filtered through the clouds. Their bay gelding, Cedar, stood warm and dry in a stable carved from that same ancient rock. The Redmonds had food enough for months. Water flowed from a spring that seeped through the sandstone. Their hearth's heat was held by walls that would never rot, never collapse, never fail. Isaiah poured 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to his wife. "Reckon they'll come looking for us," he said quietly. "Once this breaks," Martha took the cup. Her weathered hand was steady. "They'll come," she agreed. "The question is whether there will be anyone left to come." The Redmonds had come to come. That was 2 years before the great blizzard hit. Back then, the mountain valleys were still wild, and the promise of silver pulled men west like moths to a flame. Isaiah Redmond was 43 years old. He was a stonemason, a trade he'd learned building grand homes and public buildings in Philadelphia for 20 years. He knew stone the way a musician knows an instrument, its grain, its strength, its secrets. He could look at a cliff face and read its history, see where it would cleave and where it would hold. Martha was 5 years younger. She had been a schoolteacher before they married, a woman of books and quiet intelligence. She had grown tired of the suffocating expectations of Eastern society. They had no children. A fever had taken that possibility from them in the 3rd year of their marriage. But they had each other. They also had a shared dream, to build something lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. The silver boom had drawn them west, but not for the usual reasons. Isaiah had no interest in mining. His interest was in the land itself. The dramatic cliffs and canyons, the layered sandstone that spoke of ages beyond human reckoning. He had read accounts of ancient cliff dwellings found in canyons to the south, homes built by a vanished people who understood something modern settlers had forgotten. They had built with the land, not upon it. They had let the earth itself provide shelter. Isaiah wanted to do the same. Where would he find a place for such a vision in a boom town rushing for silver? Ridgerist was a mining town, tucked into the narrow valley of the Eagle River. Sky-high peaks surrounded it. When the Redmonds first arrived, the town was exploding. Prospectors and merchants filled its single street. Saloons roared every night. Land in the valley was expensive, already claimed by men with money and big plans. But the sheer sandstone cliffs above rising 90 meters on either side, those were considered useless. Isaiah looked at those cliffs and saw home. He filed a claim on a piece of the southern wall. It was a spot where a natural overhang jutted out about 18 meters above the valley floor. The overhang was deep, almost 4.5 meters. The sandstone beneath it was soft enough to carve, but hard enough to last. A narrow trail, barely a goat path, wound its way up from the valley below. The claim cost him $4. The land office clerk thought he was crazy. "You mean to live on a cliff, like a bird?" the clerk asked, his voice full of disbelief. "Like a man who understands stone," Isaiah replied. Word of the stonemason's strange claim spread through Ridgerist in hours. By evening, it was the main topic in every saloon and boarding house. A man intended to carve a home into the cliff face. He and his wife would live like swallows in a mud nest, perched above the town like hermits or lunatics. Harlan Prescott, the richest man in Ridgerist, found the whole thing incredibly funny. Prescott had made his fortune buying up valley property and selling it for huge profits. He was building himself a grand house at the head of the valley. It had 3 stories of imported timber, glass windows shipped all the way from Denver, and a veranda that looked over the town like a throne. The house was costing him $8,000, and he wanted everyone to know it. The stonemason wants to live in a hole in the wall, Prescott announced at the assay office, where men gathered to weigh their fortunes. Perhaps he's part cliff swallow. Perhaps his wife lays eggs. The men around him laughed. I give them 1 winter. 1 winter. And they'll come crawling down begging for a proper roof over their heads. The Redmonds project quickly got a name, the Swallow's Nest. Heard about the Swallow's Nest? Became a common joke. The stonemason's building a perch for his family, hope they don't fall off when the wind blows. Martha heard the whispers when she came to town for supplies. She saw the pitying looks, the barely hidden smirks. The women of Ridgerist, led by Mrs. Prescott, made no effort to include her. They had decided she was either pathetic or insane, and neither condition called for friendship. Martha bore it all with a quiet dignity. Let them laugh, she told Isaiah one evening. They sat by their campfire beneath the overhang that would become their home. Stone does not care for opinions. Neither should we. Construction on the Swallow's Nest started in June of 1878. Isaiah worked for 14 months with a stonemason's patience. He knew that haste was the enemy of permanence. He carved into the soft sandstone with a hammer and chisel. The rooms seemed to grow right out of the rock. The main chamber was 6 meters wide and 4.5 meters deep. Its ceiling rose to 2.5 meters at the peak. A smaller room to the side would be their bedroom. A third space, connected by a short passage, would house their bay gelding, cedar, and provide storage. The cliff's natural overhang provided crucial protection. It extended 4.5 meters out from their door. This meant rain and snow would land well in front of their entrance, never on their roof. No snow would pile up against their doorway. The dwelling faced south. Even in winter, when the sun hung low, direct light streamed through their windows for hours each day. This light warmed the stone floor. This was key. Isaiah knew that rock, unlike wood, held heat. A stone floor warmed by the winter's sun would radiate that warmth long into the night. The massive cliff behind them would never drop below 10 degrees Celsius, even in the coldest months. They were not building a house that sat upon the earth. They were building a house that was part of the earth, sharing in its ancient, stable warmth. This approach was fundamentally different from the wooden structures going up across Ridgerist. Martha worked alongside Isaiah every day. Her hands, once soft from holding chalk and books, grew calloused and strong. She learned to mix mortar, to fit stones, and to read the grain of the sandstone. Cedar hauled materials up the narrow trail, timber for window frames and the door, glass for the windows, iron for hinges. The total cost, including the claim and all materials, came to just $234. By August of 1879, the Swallow's Nest was complete. It was modest compared to Ridgerist boomtown ambitions, but beautiful in its simplicity. A home that looked like it had grown from the cliff itself. Its windows caught the morning light. Its entrance remained sheltered beneath the great stone overhang. The dwelling was ready. The first winter would be its test. The first winter in the cliff dwelling, 1879 to 1880, was mild. Snow fell, but not too much. Temperatures dropped, but never to the bone-chilling cold the high country could truly deliver. Isaiah and Martha passed the season in remarkable comfort. Their stone floors, warmed by the winter sun, kept the interior pleasant with just a small fire in the hearth. The deep overhang above their door kept snow from piling up. The solid cliff face behind them blocked the worst of the wind. Down in the valley, the people of Ridgerist struggled. They burned cordwood by the ton, stuffing rags into every gap in their plank walls. Most mornings they woke to frost on their blankets. Harlan Prescott's grand house, for all its $8,000 expense, proved drafty and difficult to heat. His imported windows let in the cold. His 3 stories meant 3 stories of heat constantly escaping through the roof. But mild winters proved nothing. It was the hard winters that tested a home's worth. Through the year 1880, Isaiah continued to improve their dwelling. He carved more storage spaces deep into the rock. He built a cistern to catch rainwater that filtered through the sandstone, emerging pure and cold. He laid in supplies, dried meat, preserved vegetables, flour, salt, and coffee. Enough to last 6 months if they needed it. "You're preparing for a siege," Martha observed one autumn afternoon, watching him stack provisions. Isaiah looked at her. I'm preparing for winter. In the mountains, that's the same thing. The old-timers had been talking all summer. The signs were bad, they said. The elk had moved to lower ground too early. The squirrels were gathering nuts with unusual frenzy. The woolly caterpillars were solid black from end to end. An old Ute man, one of the few who still passed through the territory, had told the owner of the general store that the coming winter would be one for the stories, a winter that would separate the living from the dead. Ridgerist paid little attention. The silver was still flowing. The money was still good. Winter was just something to endure between seasons of prosperity. But Isaiah's certainty is about to meet the same winter he dismissed. The true test arrived on March 2nd, 1881. It started as a typical spring storm, heavy snow driven by strong winds. But it didn't stop. Day after day, the snow kept falling. The temperature plummeted. Winds howled down the valley, piling drifts against buildings with frightening speed. By the 5th day, the lower floors of most structures had vanished. By the 8th day, only chimneys and the very peaks of roofs were still visible. 2 days later, even those were gone. Ridgerist was entombed. Inside their buried homes, families huddled around stoves. Firewood dwindled fast. The snow pressed against walls and roofs. It insulated them, yes, but it also threatened to collapse their homes. Worse, it blocked their chimneys, smoke-filled rooms. Families had to choose between freezing and suffocating. Harlan Prescott's grand house fared worst of all. Its 3 stories meant more surface area for the snow to push against. His imported timbers, designed for milder eastern climates, groaned and cracked under the crushing weight. On the 9th day, the entire north wall gave way. It collapsed inward, burying the parlor under tons of snow. The Prescott family retreated to the kitchen, the only room still intact. They prayed. 60 feet above the valley floor, the Redmonds watched the disaster unfold. Their cliff dwelling performed exactly as Isaiah had designed. On the 7th day, Martha looked out at the white void that had swallowed the valley. "There are children down there," she said. "Families. They're dying. Isaiah." He stood beside her, his voice quiet. "I know." Isaiah studied the cliff face. The trail down to the valley was buried under 6 meters of snow. He pictured the angles, the distances, thought about ropes, anchors, and the risks. "Maybe," he said, "when the storm breaks." It broke on the 12th day. The wind died. The snow stopped. The sun came out, brilliant and blinding over a landscape that looked like the surface of the moon. Within the hour, Isaiah and Martha began their rescue. Isaiah had prepared for this. He hadn't spoken of it to Martha, but he had anchored iron rings into the cliff during construction. These were points where ropes could be secured. He had extra rope, extra provisions, extra blankets. He had, without fully admitting it to himself, known that this day might come. They descended on ropes. Isaiah went first, then Martha, lowering themselves down the cliff face to the surface of the snow. It was so deep and so densely packed they could walk on it. It felt like walking on the roof of the world. They found the first chimney by a faint wisp of smoke. Isaiah dug. Martha called down the shaft. A voice answered. Weak, terrified, but alive. It was the Patterson family. 4 souls had been surviving on melted snow and the last scraps of their larder. They dug for 6 hours, opening a passage wide enough for the Pattersons to climb out. Then they moved to the next chimney, and the next. Over the next 3 days, the Redmonds pulled 31 people from the buried town of Ridgerist. But now, a new problem. Where would these dozens of people shelter in the aftermath? They led the groups then, one at a time, up the narrow trail that snaked to the cliff dwelling. Everyone in town had mocked it. They called it a swallow's nest. But this nest, designed for 2, somehow held dozens. People packed into its chambers like the ancient cliff dwellers who had built the first homes centuries before. The Redmonds shared everything. Their food, their water, their warmth. Martha took charge, organizing the refugees. She rationed supplies, tended to the frostbitten. She cared for the ill. Isaiah kept going. He kept digging for those still trapped below. Harlan Prescott was among the last to be saved. They found him on the 4th day. He huddled with his wife and 2 children in the ruins of his kitchen. It was the only part of his $8,000 mansion still standing. He was barely conscious, his face blackened by frostbite. His grand ambitions reduced to a desperate clinging to life. Isaiah dug him out himself. He hauled the man up through the shaft of snow like a miner pulling ore from the earth. Prescott's wife and children followed, weeping with relief and exhaustion. At the base of the cliff, Prescott stopped. He looked up at the dwelling he had mocked, the swallow's nest. It was warm. It was secure. It was utterly unharmed by the storm that had destroyed everything he had built. "I called you mad," he whispered. "I said you were fools." Isaiah said nothing. He simply extended his hand. Prescott took it, and together they climbed the trail to safety. 47 people survived the 12-day storm by sheltering in the Redmond's cliff dwelling. Another 18 survived in their buried homes, rescued by the efforts Isaiah and Martha organized. 17 souls perished. They froze in structures that could not protect them, or suffocated when their chimneys became blocked. It was a tragedy, but without the swallow's nest, it would have been an annihilation. The reckoning arrived in April. The snow finally melted enough for the survivors to see the full devastation. Ridgerist was gone. Every building in the valley had collapsed or was too damaged to save. Harlan Prescott's grand house? Nothing but splintered wood and shattered glass. A gathering was called. There was no building left standing, so they met at the base of the cliff. They stood in the shadow of the dwelling that had saved them all. Prescott spoke first. He was a changed man. His frostbitten face was still healing. His pride completely gone. "I have spent my life building monuments to my own vanity," he said, his voice rough. "Grand houses, impressive facades, things meant to be admired." He looked up at the cliff dwelling above. Modest, enduring, carved from the living rock. The Redmonds built something different. They built something that would last, something that worked with the land instead of against it. He turned to Isaiah and Martha. They stood quietly at the edge of the crowd. "I mocked your home. I called it a swallow's nest fit only for birds. I was arrogant, and I was wrong. Your nest sheltered us when my mansion crumbled. Your wisdom saved us when my money meant nothing." His voice broke. "I have nothing left to offer but my gratitude and my apology. Both are yours for whatever they are worth." Martha stepped forward. Her voice was clear and calm. It carried across the silent assembly. "Mr. Prescott, you owe us no apology. We built our home for ourselves, not to prove anyone wrong. The stone does not judge. The cliff does not remember insults. We are all alive, and that is what matters." She looked around at the faces of her neighbors, people who had laughed at her, excluded her, pitied her, people she had pulled from the snow with her own hands. "Ridgerist will be rebuilt," she continued. "The question is how. We can build as we did before, quickly, cheaply, hoping the next storm will be gentler. Or we can learn from what the land has taught us. We can build with the earth, not upon it. We can make homes that will shelter our grandchildren's grandchildren." Isaiah stepped beside his wife. "I will teach anyone who wishes to learn," he said simply. "The stone is patient. It will wait for us to understand." The rebuilding of Ridgerist took 3 years. The town that rose from the snow was completely different from the one that had been buried. Under Isaiah's careful eye, new homes went into the cliff faces on both sides of the valley. Some were carved directly from the rock, just like the Redmonds' home. Others were built against the cliff, using the solid stone as a back wall, with the natural overhangs forming roofs. Every new home faced south, catching the winter sun. They all used the heavy stone to hold onto heat, keeping the inside temperature steady, and every single one was built high above the valley floor, safe from the deep snow that had almost killed everyone. Harlan Prescott never rebuilt his grand mansion. Instead, he paid for a community hall, carved deep into the eastern cliff. It was a place where the whole town could gather if disaster ever struck again. Prescott worked alongside the builders, learning to cut stone and mix mortar. In that physical work, he found a satisfaction his wealth had never given him. The idea of building like the Redmonds spread. Travelers and miners carried the phrase to other mountain towns. It meant building with humility, with deep respect for the land's power. It meant building with an eye toward generations, not just the next season. Isaiah and Martha Redmond lived in their cliff dwelling for another 34 years. They passed away within months of each other, in the winter of 1915. They had no children of their own, but they taught hundreds of others how to build homes that would last. Their dwelling still stands today, preserved as a historical site. Its windows still catch the winter sun. The stones are still warm to the touch. Above the entrance, carved in Isaiah's careful hand, are words that have weathered more than a century of mountain storms. The earth endures. Build with her. Visitors sometimes ask why the carving uses her instead of it. The guides tell them Martha insisted. She said the earth was not a thing to be conquered, but a partner to be respected. She had always been the wiser of the two. When we fight against the world, it often humbles us. When we work with it, the world can shelter us. This story reminds us that true strength often comes from finding harmony with nature, not from trying to conquer it. If this idea resonated with you, subscribe. I find stories like this all the time, and let me know in the comments. What lesson from the past do you think we need to remember today?